of it by then, and I had even tired of the owner's belated apologies. Okay, that's the end of the pleasantries, I thought, as the dog persisted to keep getting out of the water and jumping back in again. It was having fun. I wasn't. I moved further along the bank and began to dry my feet and collect my things. The lady then asked if I would like a cold drink and invited me across their bridge and into their house. I accepted, and we then proceeded to have a very enjoyable half an hour whereby she and her husband showed me the historic quirks their house possessed and gave me a more in-depth account of its history. I was fascinated and greatly appreciated the impromptu distraction. I found it most entertaining and informative. Once my guided tour ended, I finished my drink and it was time for me to depart. I expressed my gratitude and they wished me well on the rest of my journey. I laden myself with my backpack once more and then headed off into the haze of the afternoon heat. Halfway down the remainder of the lane, I then realised that I'd forgotten to ask if I could refill my bottles. I debated about going back, and although I thought that they might not take kindly to me reappearing, I did so, but there was no answer when I knocked. I thought better of it and didn't wait for very long, but left and continued to think that I could probably find somewhere in the village to refill my bottles anyway. However, it did lead me to wonder why I had the feeling that they wouldn't have taken kindly to hearing that I was doing a pilgrimage in remembrance of Brian Haw in the first place. I don't know why that was exactly, it was just a feeling I had, and I certainly didn't know it for a fact. All I can say is that my intuition told me that their political ideology was not conducive to what Brian Haw stood for and did for what he believed in, and or to myself for that matter. I felt that if I mentioned it, then my welcome would have been more short-lived and that I would have been politely ushered out of the door. Again, I don't know this for a fact, and it may very well be that it actually highlights some prejudices within myself. But what I will say is that my intuition is rarely wrong in these circumstances, or rather, I really misinterpret my intuition in these circumstances. But I wish to make it absolutely clear that the next thoughts that came my way were not directly related or directed at the people for whom had just been so good to me. It was rather that the analysing of my intuition about them led me on to think about the kind of people who were against Brian Haw and what he did. Does that make sense? I hope so, because those people are not here to defend themselves and correct me if I am wrong. But there are most definitely people out there who think that Brian's peaceful protest was wrong, that it consumed vital police resources and that it should have been cleaned up because it made Parliament Square look untidy. Well, to all those people, I dedicate the recollection of the thoughts I had next, while I walked down the remainder of that private lane and finally joined the ancient Pilgrim's Way at the point where it crossed the River Darent. This is what I thought, and I wanted to say. This is what I thought and what I wanted to say to those people of the like that I've just described. Where's your effing morality? What the fuck is wrong with your moral compass? Untidy, costing taxpayers money in police time and resources. What about all the public money spent on dropping bombs? What about that cost? What about the maiming and the killing of innocent children? What about that genocide? What about the destruction? What about the mayhem caused? What about the remains of depleted uranium polluting countries, causing birth defects in children for generations to come? What about that mess? What about all the pain and suffering caused? What about the misery? What about the deceit demonstrated by politicians? What about the lies? And you dare to think that you stand on some kind of moral high ground? You dare to condemn a man with the integrity and honesty of Brian Haw? Your moral compass is defective, and you should take a long and good look at yourself. For Christ's sake, open your eyes and see beyond the nonsense you observe in the mainstream media and news. That's what Brian did, and that's why he spent 10 years of his life living in a tent and protesting in Parliament Square. I cried when I wrote that. But Brian put it best. We have the right to freedom of expression. If you can't do it here outside Parliament, where can you do it? And that fundamentally is what the people who are against peaceful and democratic acts should ask themselves. I'll leave it with you to consider. I didn't get emotional then, because I think the clarity was needed. People need clarity. What matters most in the world? What's the right thing to do? What's the wrong thing to do? What can you live with? And what must end? Thank you, Brian. God bless you. It's love.